Fake HOA cops harassed my wife, then found out she is a CIA agent. It all started when two so-called HOA officers came knocking on our door. No uniforms, no ID, just attitude. I was out grabbing groceries and my wife answered. Big mistake for them. What they didn't know. My wife isn't just another suburban mom. She's a CIA operative on leave. What unfolded next made those fake cops wish they never stepped foot on our porch. They pulled up in an old black SUV, the kind that's always a few dents short of looking official, and parked it right in front of our house. It was a Wednesday morning, calm and uneventful, until these two guys stepped out. Both wore polo shirts with faded HOA security embroidered on the chest, like something ironed on at home. No badges, no IDs, no clipboard or tablet, nothing that said they were real. Just a heavy air of authority and a cocky posture that made it seem like they thought they owned the place. My wife was home alone that day, tending to her morning routine, watering the plants and sipping coffee when the knock came. Sharp, repetitive, the kind that demands attention instead of requesting it. She opened the door halfway, leaving the latch in place. The taller of the two men took a step back and folded his arms, squinting like he was inspecting a problem. The shorter guy stood with his hand on his hip, hovering near a belt that had no actual gear, just the look of one. He announced that they were with the Homeowners Association and that there had been several complaints filed against our property. No specifics, just complaints. About what? They wouldn't say. Only that they needed to come inside to inspect a few things. That's when the red flags started waving. First off, no HOA agent, real or fake, has the legal right to demand access into a private residence without prior notice or due cause. But these guys weren't banking on legalities. They were banking on fear. They probably thought a woman home alone would get flustered, maybe even intimidated. But they didn't know my wife. She asked to see identification, to which the short one flashed a laminated card so quickly it could have been a library card. She asked for their HOA office number, another deflection. They said the board would follow up later if she refused to cooperate. She played it cool, nodded, and said she'd wait to hear from the board. The men didn't like that. The tall one stepped forward, raising his voice, accusing her of hiding violations. He claimed we had unapproved exterior modifications and that fines would be issued immediately. When she asked what modifications he was referring to, he threw out something about non-compliant roofing materials, even though our roof hadn't been touched in over 5 years. It was like they were picking things out of thin air. My wife, meanwhile, kept her expression neutral. Inside, she was assessing everything, their tone, their body language, their positioning. Years of CIA fieldwork made her mind tick faster than most. She noticed they never looked at each other for cues, which meant they didn't rehearse this. Their story was weak, their cover even weaker. And yet, they were persistent. They asked about who else lived there, whether she was alone, what kind of car we drove, whether there were cameras around. Strange questions for HOA workers, don't you think? The tall one even tried to peer inside the house when she opened the door slightly to let our dog back in. She noticed him scanning for movement inside, looking for evidence of anyone else being home. Her gut told her they weren't just scammers. They were looking for something, or someone. She kept the dog between her and the door, a subtle move that forced them to maintain their distance. Still, they hovered, pressing on about entry and inspections. They repeated the phrase official business more than once, hoping it would sound legitimate the more they said it. Meanwhile, one of them kept fidgeting, checking over his shoulder like someone who wasn't sure if they were being watched. My wife noticed it. Not fear, not nervousness, just a lack of training. The kind of mistake rookies make when pretending to be someone they're not. She asked again if they were going to provide contact information for their supervisor, and the tall one snapped, saying the HOA had authorized on-site actions if she continued to be uncooperative. That was the moment her instincts fully kicked in. She didn't slam the door or call 911. Not yet. She went into another room, not to escape but to access something only she would know how to use properly. Something she hadn't needed in years. She didn't want to escalate anything prematurely, but she knew these men were not from the HOA. They had too much interest in the house, too little actual protocol, and just enough confidence to believe they could push past a normal suburban woman. Unfortunately for them, she wasn't normal. Not even close. The moment they realized she wasn't giving in easily, their tone shifted from fake professionalism to thinly veiled hostility. The shorter man stepped forward, planting his foot inside the threshold as she opened the door just a few inches to signal the end of the conversation. His posture was aggressive, like he was daring her to push him out. The taller one took a step closer too, now towering over the porch, his arms crossed in a stance meant to intimidate. They stopped pretending to be polite. No more ma'am or vague HOA lingo. Now it was all veiled threats and accusations. They started throwing out accusations one after the other, hoping something would stick. The shorter one claimed the garden landscaping violated neighborhood regulations. The taller one pointed to our mailbox and insisted it was non-compliant with HOA standards. Neither statement made sense, because we'd never received a single violation notice in years of living there. But logic wasn't their weapon. Intimidation was. They spoke louder, more urgently, as if trying to provoke panic. When my wife calmly asked for a printed copy of the supposed violations, the tall one scoffed and said that paperwork was irrelevant at this stage. He said fines were being processed and that the property was under formal review. They demanded she open the gate to the backyard. When she refused again, they stepped back and started taking photos of the porch, the windows, even her through the screen door. She noticed their phones weren't even pointed steadily, like they weren't interested in real documentation but just trying to apply psychological pressure. One of them pretended to talk on a call, speaking loud enough for her to hear things like, "She's resisting," and "We'll escalate." She kept her composure, her voice low and even, never once raising it. But the taller man became visibly agitated by this. He leaned closer to the screen, asking if her husband was the one with all the firearms. That question was bizarre. Not only was it invasive, it had nothing to do with the HOA. That's when her suspicion turned to certainty. This wasn't just harassment. They were fishing for something. Or maybe someone. They didn't know who she was, but they seemed determined to find something inside the house. It was a mistake on their part to push this far. Then came the moment that made everything spiral further. The shorter guy walked around the side of the house without permission. My wife moved to follow him from inside, keeping him in her peripheral view through the windows. The taller one stayed near the door, watching her movements like a hawk. He asked if she had any military background. She just tilted her head slightly and asked why that mattered. He shrugged and muttered something about her being too calm for a regular housewife. She let that sit in the air for a moment before quietly asking if they were done making up charges. The man's face tightened, like he suddenly realized this wasn't going to go the way he expected. Outside, the short one started shaking the backyard gate, pretending to be checking for security violations. My wife, without saying a word, stepped into the hallway and reached for something hidden behind the coat rack. An old, matte black go bag she kept ready, just in case. Inside were a few tools from a past life. She didn't need to use them yet, but just holding it grounded her. She slid her phone into her pocket and turned on the voice recorder. As she stepped back into the living room, she spoke loudly enough to be recorded, saying clearly, "You're trespassing on private property. Leave now." They hesitated. The shorter man returned from the side of the house, now looking unsure. The taller one tried to recover by accusing her of obstructing an HOA investigation. She repeated her statement. "You are trespassing." Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small wallet. Not a badge, but close enough. Something that had just enough federal shine to make both men take a half step back. She didn't explain it. She didn't need to. Just the look on their faces said it all. They didn't expect that. They thought they were harassing a regular housewife, someone they could pressure into letting them snoop or intimidate into compliance. Instead, they found someone unshaken, eerily calm, and clearly not who they assumed. The taller one stammered, saying they'd be back with official documentation. My wife told him to bring the sheriff's office next time if he wanted to step foot on her porch again. She watched as they retreated to their SUV, exchanging quiet, angry words between them. One of them turned back to glare at the house, but she didn't flinch. She locked the door behind them, then immediately called a contact from an old number she hadn't used in years. Not because she was scared, but because something about this wasn't random. These men hadn't just chosen a house at random. They were looking for something, and they had no idea how badly they had miscalculated. Inside the house, the tension was thick, but my wife didn't let it show. She moved with intention, slow, deliberate, and steady, each step a calculation, each breath controlled. On the surface, she seemed composed, but beneath that calm exterior, years of field training were firing on all cylinders. She reviewed every detail from the encounter in her head. The inconsistent story, their conflicting body language, the forced urgency, and the deliberate prying into personal details. Something wasn't adding up, and it wasn't just petty intimidation anymore. It felt orchestrated, coordinated, and now that they were gone, she had to make sense of it without tipping off anyone who might still be watching. The first thing she did was run a soft perimeter check using the internal security cameras. Our home security system was disguised, subtle, and internalized, no flashy stickers or blinking lights, but it was there. She opened the living room cabinet and tapped into the feed on a hidden tablet. One of the men had briefly circled the side of the house, trying to look into the guest room window. He was moving fast, not looking for violations, looking for access points. The other man had stood with his back to the door, making a phone call while subtly scanning the surroundings. These weren't moves made by anyone enforcing HOA rules. They were searching. She accessed our motion logs, and there it was, several pings of them walking around the sides of the house, clearly beyond the bounds of a simple front door conversation. She saved the footage and copied it to an encrypted drive. Then, she pulled up a reverse search on the license plate of the SUV. It was partially visible in the footage, just enough to catch 3 numbers and 2 letters. She opened an old program from her CIA toolkit, something she had once used to track low-level assets. Within minutes, she found inconsistencies in the vehicle's registry. The car had been flagged for unrelated surveillance activity in another state. That confirmed her instincts. They weren't HOA, and they weren't amateurs either. But instead of calling the police, she made another kind of call. A secure, encrypted line she hadn't used in years. The person on the other end didn't ask questions. Just gave her a single phrase, "Red Crescent confirmed." That meant she had clearance to proceed under full cover. Her identity was still classified, buried under 5 levels of encryption within the CIA's internal systems, and her active status was technically on indefinite leave. But this event triggered something larger. If someone was sniffing around their home, specifically targeting her while she was alone, it couldn't have been coincidence. After securing the house and hiding away sensitive materials, she took a long look at herself in the mirror. The woman in front of her looked like a suburban wife in yoga pants and a hoodie. But behind the soft eyes and loose hair was someone who'd spent years embedded in volatile environments, trained to dismantle threats without leaving a trace. Her demeanor was calm, but her awareness was on high alert. And what those 2 fake agents didn't realize was that they had just walked into the lion's den. Still, there was one question that kept circling in her mind. How did they know where to look? She'd been off the radar for a long time. Her file had been sealed, and even her husband knew only the surface of her past assignments. These men had shown up without warning, asked the wrong questions, and made all the right mistakes to trigger suspicion. It wasn't about HOA violations, it was a probe, a test of some kind. Someone wanted to see if she would react like a civilian or if she still had the instincts of a field operative. She pulled out a secure laptop from behind a false panel in the pantry. It was old but encrypted. She entered a string of codes and opened a dormant channel, a shadow network for inactive operatives. The messages there were fragmented, anonymous, but one caught her eye. A brief post that read, 2 in the field, testing pressure points, looking for sleeper agents. It was vague, but the timestamp aligned with the visit. She knew then that this wasn't about her violating neighborhood rules. It was about drawing her out. Someone was checking old contacts, maybe even trying to identify which agents had truly retired and which still posed a threat. She sat still for a moment, listening. No movement outside. No more SUVs. Just the faint hum of suburban silence. But her pulse remained steady. She wasn't afraid. Not even surprised. She had always known the quiet life wouldn't last forever. What she didn't expect was that the first crack would come disguised as two underqualified men pretending to be from the HOA. They weren't ready for what they walked into. And now that they'd made their move, she had no choice but to respond. Not as a housewife, not as a neighbor, but as someone whose cover just got tested. She replayed the footage again, this time at a slower speed, scrutinizing every micro-expression on their faces. The taller man, for all his arrogance, seemed to be the less experienced of the two. He glanced around too much, shifted his weight constantly, and fumbled for words whenever pressed for information. The shorter one, however, had a different air about him. He wasn't just pretending to be confident, he had a background in this. His eyes were steady, movements deliberate, and he spoke in rehearsed phrases designed to pressure. That kind of behavior didn't scream petty con artist. It screamed handler or operative with limited clearance, which meant they weren't entirely freelance. Someone had trained them. Someone had sent them. Her instincts told her the mistake came from the taller one. He'd let something slip. It was during the brief moment when he got frustrated and asked about weapons inside the house. The phrasing he used wasn't random, it was tactical. Is your husband the one with the weapons and training? Not a weapon. Weapons and training. That wasn't an HOA violation cue. That was profile language, something you'd only say if you were trying to confirm someone's operational status or background. And if they suspected her husband was the one with a covert past, then that confirmed it. They didn't know her real identity. They thought she was just the wife. She stood in the middle of the living room and thought back to that one mission 5 years ago. The one in Prague where she had to swap identities with a deep-cover NSA agent and disappear under civilian identity. That's when the dots started connecting. There had been rumors floating around intel circles of a rogue network collecting former American asset profiles, hoping to use pressure, blackmail, or exposure to draw them out of retirement. The fact that they'd shown up at her door, asked about weapons, tried to force entry without a warrant, and then panicked when pressed. This wasn't a local move. It was global. Someone was looking for ghosts in the system, and she had just given them a chill they weren't expecting. Because when she flashed that wallet with the old ID, not only did the taller man stammer, his partner froze entirely. The muscles in his jaw locked. His eyes darted to her hands, and he stopped talking mid-sentence. That's when she knew. That one detail, that one reflex, it gave him away. She wasn't just dealing with amateurs. She was dealing with operatives testing old covers. And her reveal, however brief, had told them one thing. They'd found someone dangerous. She opened the drawer in her study and pulled out a flash drive, one she hadn't touched in years. Inside was a dead drop system, a trail of pre-written responses designed for this exact situation. If she activated it, several agencies would receive a soft ping. One that wouldn't sound alarms but would start a background check. Just enough for someone in a basement office to start digging. But she didn't trigger it yet. She wanted to see if these guys came back. Because if they returned, it meant the probe wasn't finished. It meant she had a chance to find out who sent them. Her husband returned home late that afternoon, groceries in hand, unaware of the storm that had just passed through their quiet neighborhood. She briefed him without panic, laying out the facts and evidence. He wasn't surprised, not entirely. He knew there were parts of her past she couldn't tell him. But hearing it confirmed, watching her shift from wife to operative in a matter of minutes, it stunned him. And then he asked the question she had been waiting for. Do you think they'll come back? She answered with a nod, not because she was certain, but because she knew how these operations worked. They'd made a move and now they'd watch. Maybe not in person. Maybe through drones, neighbors, tapped phones, fake delivery drivers. The next mistake would be hers to make, if she wasn't careful. But that also gave her the upper hand. She was the unknown variable in their equation, the piece that didn't fit their intel. And when the shorter man froze at the sight of her ID, she realized something even more important. He recognized the agency but not her. That meant they weren't trying to eliminate her. Not yet. They were trying to verify her, which meant they had doubts. Doubts she could exploit. Doubts she could use. It gave her leverage. And leverage in her world was everything. The moment he slipped and revealed he was more than just a fake HOA officer, the moment his training kicked in and his fear showed, it changed the game. He wasn't just pretending anymore. He was exposed. She didn't wait long. The next morning, a white sedan appeared across the street. Unmarked, tinted windows, parked for hours without anyone getting in or out. Most neighbors wouldn't have noticed, but she wasn't most neighbors. She observed through a narrow slit between the blinds, sipping her coffee while noting the license plate. Temporary tags. Clean exterior, no bumper stickers, nothing personalized. The type of vehicle chosen for blending in, but never staying too long. Her instincts flared surveillance. But instead of reacting, she let them watch. Let them think they were in control. Inside the house, she prepared. If they were watching, she'd give them something to see. She stuck to routine, watering plants, feeding the dog, waving at the mailman. But behind the scenes, she was layering every digital and physical countermeasure she had. She placed a tiny jamming device near the front windows, just strong enough to interfere with small-range directional microphones. She swept for RF signals in the living room and found one, weak, likely embedded in the fake HOA notice they left in the mailbox the day before. She deactivated it with a neutralizer pen and tossed it into the microwave to fry the internals. Then she took the next step. She pulled out a hard case from the floorboard safe in the bedroom. Inside was her old field badge, long expired, but still embedded with enough encrypted metadata to ping the right channels. She didn't need it to bluff anymore. She was ready to go active if needed. Her fingers brushed over the cold metal and the old photo inside. Younger eyes, tighter jawline, shorter hair. But the look in those eyes, same as now. A readiness, a lack of fear. That afternoon, the doorbell rang again. This time, only one man stood at the door. Not one of the two from the day before, but someone new, clean-cut, pressed khakis, holding a clipboard. He introduced himself as a compliance representative from the HOA legal team and said he wanted to follow up on a misunderstanding involving unauthorized agents. Her expression didn't change. She asked him to show credentials. He smiled and said they didn't carry ID on private property. Wrong answer. She told him if he stepped off the porch and didn't return with documentation and law enforcement, the conversation was over. He hesitated, then mumbled something about escalation protocols. She watched his hand twitch, his posture lean slightly toward retreat. She noticed the earpiece under his collar and the faint sound of someone whispering through it. Whoever was talking to him wasn't doing a great job. He backed away slowly, trying to maintain dignity, but the interaction told her everything she needed to know. That's when she made her move. She went into the study, unlocked her encrypted laptop and sent one signal, one that only a select few would recognize. It was buried under code phrases and outdated satellite coordinates, but the right analyst would see it and know. Former operative under surveillance, possible rogue element active, clearance check required. Then she waited. It didn't take long. 2 hours later, she got a call from a restricted number. The voice on the other end was familiar, calm, and direct. It was her old handler, someone she hadn't heard from in 7 years. He said only one sentence. "Is the package secure?" That was their old check-in protocol, and her response told him everything. Secured, but compromised perimeter. He went quiet, then said they would take it from there. No explanation, no follow-up. The call ended just as quickly as it began. Half an hour later, the white sedan across the street pulled away. No noise, no panic. Just gone. She didn't need to wonder who handled it. She knew. Her old agency had just pulled surveillance off her house without her asking. That meant only one thing: they verified her status. She wasn't just a civilian with history anymore. They'd marked her as reactivated. Not officially, not publicly, but internally, she was live again. Not as an agent on assignment, but as someone whose identity and presence were no longer dormant. And the real shift came that evening when she opened the locked drawer in the kitchen island and retrieved the small velvet case that had sat untouched for years. Inside was the actual CIA field badge, the one never shown, never flashed casually. She placed it on the table, staring at it in silence. The world she left behind had just come back to her doorstep. And instead of running from it, she now had to stand inside it. The next morning, she dressed differently. Not in tactical gear, not in anything dramatic, but sharper, more defined. Athletic fit jacket. Utility boots. Simple black watch. She didn't do it for them. She did it for her. Because now, whether they returned or not, the situation had changed. No more waiting. No more hiding. They had forced her hand. And in doing so, they had reminded her of something long buried. They reminded her who she really was. The neighborhood was quiet the next day. Birds chirped, sprinklers rotated rhythmically, and the mail truck moved slowly from house to house like nothing unusual had ever happened. But for her, the silence wasn't peace. It was pressure. A vacuum left by the retreat of something dangerous. The fake HOA officers hadn't returned. The surveillance car had vanished, and the man with the clipboard was nowhere to be seen. But she knew better than to assume they were gone for good. Silence after a probe like this didn't mean retreat, it meant recalculation. She ran another scan of the perimeter just before noon. Nothing out of the ordinary. No new signals, no interference, no movement that didn't belong. But her instincts told her the next step wasn't going to be surveillance. It would be contact, indirect or digital. Someone would reach out. And sure enough, her prediction came true. Around 2 p.m., she received a message on her old secure line. It wasn't routed through any modern device. Came in through a VPN she'd installed 10 years ago, long dormant, hidden behind layers of encrypted junk data. The message was simple. A single word and a set of coordinates. The word was echo, a code term she hadn't heard since her last operation, one used to identify unverified field activity in domestic zones. It wasn't a warning, it was a summons. The coordinates pointed to a safe house 2 towns over, disguised as a self-storage facility. She didn't hesitate. She erased the message, disconnected the line, and locked up the laptop. Then she packed a secondary go bag, took a back route out of the neighborhood, and headed off without triggering any attention. At the facility, she used a digital key from her lanyard to unlock Unit 319. Inside was a stripped-down briefing station, basic table, chair, secured laptop, and an envelope marked with a red triangle. She opened the envelope first. It contained printed photos of the 2 fake HOA agents, along with short dossiers. No real names, just aliases and their operational roles. Asset 12A and 12B. Both were part of an international contractor cell recently flagged for crossing into CIA territory. Not enemies. Not allies. A rogue entity playing both sides, often used for plausible deniability work, disguised intrusions, identity verification missions, intelligence theft. But the more important document was clipped behind the photos. A memo from a deputy director marked Echo 4, Reactivation Authorization. It confirmed what she had already suspected. The agency had flagged her, not as a threat but as an asset, dormant but not forgotten. And now reactivated. Not for long-term service. Not yet. But for this. A single case clearance with full defensive autonomy. Meaning, if these men returned or their team escalated, she had full legal backing to neutralize the threat. She sat for a moment, staring at the folder in her hands. It wasn't the first time she'd been asked to come back for a one-off, but it was the first time it had come to her doorstep. That changed things. That made it personal. It meant someone had gotten too close to her civilian identity, and the agency had failed to protect it. And now they were counting on her to protect herself. Not because they couldn't help, but because they wanted to see if she still could. She spent the next hour reviewing surveillance images and flagged communications involving her name, address, and past aliases. The breach had been subtle. Someone had cross-referenced property ownership records with agency redaction logs, looking for patterns. They were clever. A network of freelancers and silent observers who'd spent years poking at weak spots. This time, they'd poked the wrong one. When she returned home, she felt different. Not angry, not scared, focused. The fake agents hadn't just made a mistake by pushing her. They'd exposed themselves. They had no idea she'd already identified their full team, tracked their vehicle, and accessed their burner profiles. She wasn't waiting for them anymore. She was preparing for them. And if they stepped foot on her property again, the welcome would be different. Before sunset, she checked the emergency drawer in the hallway. Inside was her real badge. Not a flash prop, but the one that opened doors most people didn't know existed. Alongside it was a compact firearm, still locked in a biometric case, untouched since she entered civilian life. She placed both on the dining table, sat across from them, and stared for a while. Then came the final twist of the day. Around 9:42 p.m., a dark SUV pulled up again. Not the old one. This was a new model. Tinted black. No plates. It didn't park out front this time. Parked down the road, engine off, lights out. She didn't move, didn't call anyone. Instead, she stood quietly in the dark living room, watching from behind the curtains, holding her old ID in one hand. The SUV sat there for 15 minutes before backing out slowly, vanishing into the shadows without ever approaching the house. They had seen the lights were off, but they probably also saw something else. A blinking red light from inside the window. A signal. A warning. One only people like them would understand. She didn't need to chase them. She already sent a louder message. She wasn't hiding anymore.